Welcome back to the channel, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're talking Sony, Spider-Man, Disney, Marvel, what's going on. Okay, I did a video on this yesterday which explained a little bit more. I'll leave it linked over there somewhere. Please do go check that out. I got a lot of flack for that video because I framed it as Disney's greed. I stand by that, even with this new information. I don't think that this negates my standpoint on it at all. And I was really surprised to see everyone defending Disney. You've got to remember, ladies and gents, this is a company which is very close to having a monopoly and, you know, essentially does have a monopoly on the movie industry, is raking in billions and billions and billions, and is still making more money off Spider-Man than Sony is anyway, which I'll get onto that in a second. And then they wanted to increase that even further. So, you've got to remember, Sony, not only that, Disney wanted to monopolize the movie industry even further by having another stake in another studio. So, the background of it is, and why Disney actually earns more money off Spider-Man than Sony anyway, Sony owns Spider-Man, the movie rights. That's what they own. They bought it out fair and square when Marvel was going through hard times. So when everyone's like, Sony should just let it go home, Marvel sold it. Home shouldn't have kicked out their child. Right? Yeah, that's fair. Okay. Stop acting like naive, petulant children when we talk about this. It's a business. Marvel fell on hard times and they sold the rights. Sony owns that fair and square. Completely fair and square. But what they don't own is the merchandising rights. And if you know anything, absolutely anything about the way the movie industry works and the way these movies get made and financed, merchandising rights is incredibly lucrative. In fact, it can be more lucrative than movies. Absolutely it can. Because there's more product to go around, there's more toys worldwide, doesn't have to rely on release of a movie in a certain area. You know, like China, for instance, you know, because we're all clamoring to get Chinese releases these days. But Disney and Marvel owns the merchandising rights to Spider-Man. So as much as Sony made $1 billion with the Spider-Man Far From Home, Marvel, should I say, Marvel and Disney have absolutely been taking home more money across the years with the Spider-Man merchandise. So, let's get into this, because this, I don't think, like I said, I don't think it negates anything. This is an article from the Hollywood Reporter, and we'll also touch on something which Jeremy Renner said, which I really like Jeremy Renner, but I don't understand why he's getting involved in this. His comments really, they colour my view of him. Absolutely they do. So it says, Spider-Man standoff, why Sony thinks it doesn't need Kevin's playbook anymore. So it says, Sony Pictures' Tom Rothman and Marvel's Kevin Feige had plenty of smiles at the Hollywood premiere of Spider-Man Far From Home in late June. But the pearly whites bellied in an inner turmoil while the executives hit the red carpet, talks to extend the unique partnership between Sony and Disney, which owns Marvel Studios, were breaking down over the future use of the character of Spider-Man. Also, really important to note, Disney owns the merchandising rights, but they were also able to use Spider-Man in their own movies to bolster that as a marketing tool. So a lot of things people aren't, I think a lot of people seem to be negating from this. Why are we defending Disney? Why? And it seems like a lot of people are annoyed with Sony because of the games division. That's fine. Be annoyed with the games division. Don't be annoyed with the films. It's completely separate. They literally are run like separate companies. So, yeah. Disney had been seeking a co-financing arrangement on upcoming movies, looking for at least a 30% stake. Sony, which counts Spider-Man as one of its only reliable money-making franchises, said no. And I think that's perfectly fair and reasonable. Again, from the things which I've outlined, previously it was reported as a 50-50 stake. So they had a 5% stake, and then they jumped, reportedly, to 45% increase. I still think at least 30% is a little bit unreasonable. I think 20 to 25% is more reasonable. A quarter stake, whilst you are taking home the entire merchandising profits. I think that's perfectly reasonable. And as well, you know, Sony have been very professional about this. Some previous reports indicated that Sony had like initially released a statement and blah blah blah. But their statement saying that Kevin Feige was busy is not throwing Disney under the bus. It's a very professional way of saying talks are broken down. It's just to say, yeah, Kevin Feige's busy. Doesn't matter. It's fine. Hopefully we'll talk again in future. That's very professional. Now, before sides walked away, talks had gone to the top level with Rothman and CEO Tony Vinciquerra on Sony's side and Disney Studios co-chairman Alan Horn and Alan Bergman involved. In the next month and a half, Far From Home would go on to catch 1.1 billion in the box office web, becoming Sony's biggest movie of all time. The figure reinforced both sides' thinking. Sony executives believed they didn't need Disney anymore, and Disney was in no way leaving money and Peter Parker behind. But they did. They did. Because they sold him. You don't have a stake in it anymore. If Sony doesn't want you to have a stake in it anymore, they don't have to. And a lot of people, again, on that previous video, which I've linked, a lot of people were like, well, Sony would never have made $1 billion by themselves. Venom, a movie that seemingly everyone on the internet seems to dislike, did about 850 million? Who's to say that they wouldn't have made $1 billion by themselves? The other Spider-Man movies were incredibly profitable for Sony. As much as people hate them, they were still incredibly profitable. So, yeah, I think Sony was right in this. The divorce spilled out in public on Tuesday with Sony. This is it. This is where we get to the pandering of Disney from The Hollywood Reporter. With Sony laying the blame at Disney's feet. They didn't. They were professional. They said that the Burbank-based studio now had Feige too busy to work on future movies. We hope this might change in the future, but understand that the many new responsibilities that Disney has given him, including all their newly added Marvel properties, do not allow time for him to work on the IP they do not own. There's no blame there. They're just saying, rather than both companies lose face and say, we literally can't come to an agreement, you don't lay the blame on a company. You're saying this company is so busy, they're doing such great things, they just absolutely can't work with us anymore. Shame, but hey, hopefully in future. That's professional. That is professional. And this is the Hollywood Reporter being biased to Disney. Straight up biased to Disney. Now, they continued in this report, says, this is the Jeremy Renner bit, which I was going to get to. I've actually got it up in a different tab. So we'll have a look at this tab here, because again, it's you can actually see his tweet directly rather than just the quote. Hey, Sony Pictures, and he added them. We want Spider-Man back to the real Stan Lee and Marvel. Please, thank you. Congrats, Spider-Man rocks. Jeremy Renner, mate, I like you. I think you're cool. But don't start doing stuff like this. Don't go on a crusade against Sony. That's not cool. It's not Sony's fault that Marvel sold them, the rights. They're just doing what they have the legal obligation to do. What are you doing? I don't understand. Disney and Sony were in different places when the idea of a cooperation was broached in 2014. Sony was coming off of two successful but widely derided Amazing Spider-Man picks and was seen as squandering the most popular Marvel hero. Marvel, while successful, was still finding its footing in its Phase 2 of movies, jumping from a nadir with Thor: Dark World to a zenith with Guardians of the Galaxy. It was in this environment that then Sony Pictures Entertainment co-chairperson Amy Pascal reached out to Feige and over lunch made a proposal. What ensued was a very simple arrangement. So simple, say insiders, that the deal was only a 4 to 5 page document. Sony would loan Spider-Man out for one film, Captain America Civil War, and in return, Sony would get Feige's producing service for 2 movies. The deal was later revised to include both Avengers Infinity War and Endgame. You have to remember, Marvel wasn't in the same place as it was now. There was still a question of how far could this superhero thing go. What's wrong with this? It was a fine arrangement. And how hands-on do we know that Feige was with respect to the actual producing of this? He wasn't in the edit bay. Unlikely he was in the edit bay. Producing it, sure. And did he have a huge part of it? Yeah, absolutely he did. But it was an arrangement that Kevin Feige agreed to. So he was clearly fine with it, wasn't he? And people are like, oh, well, it was a bad arrangement in the first place. No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. Disney did not get a producing fee, nor did Feige for the initial deal. Again, this is Feige's agreement. He made this. Say multiple insiders. Just getting Spider-Man in even one of their movies at that time, that was a stem cell infusion for Marvel. And it was. If you remember the Civil War trailer, what was the highlight of that trailer? Spider-Man was the highlight. Avengers Infinity War, heavy features in the trailer, was, again, Spider-Man. Remember the hairs prickling up on his arm, Spider Sense, or the Peter Tingle, whatever we're calling it these days. So it was very lucrative for Disney to do that. Now, it says there was also the unique merchandising agreement. Sony had earlier relinquished the merchandising rights to Disney for a one-time payment of $175 million. So again, we're putting all the blame on Sony here, failing to realise that Disney owns the entire merchandising arrangement. That yes, they bought it off Sony, and they bought it fair and square. Both companies are doing what they are legally obligated to do, and they're well, legally allowed to do, should I say, within the realms of what they're, you know, the boundaries of the law and the agreements between them and the rights situation. But then we're putting all the blame on Sony and saying that they're greedy. No, if we're looking at actual greed, Disney owns the entire merchandising, right? They own that, which makes a lot of money. I mean, let's have a look, right? Also in the deal, insiders note was a provision that saw Disney making a yearly royalty payment to Sony that was amounting to around $30 million a year. That's not that much for Disney, especially considering they have given them the rights, which could be, well, the merchandise can be billions and is often just billions. So to make $30 million a year is nothing, especially with the $175 million deal for the actual merchandising rights. Disney's still making a lot of money off this. So when we're talking about greed, it's not. I framed it as it boils down to greed, and it still is greed. But it's just businesses being businesses. Businesses are there to make money. But I also think it's important to note that if Disney was to get a 50% stake in Spider-Man, they are one step closer to becoming a monopoly. And everyone was up in arms about Disney owning Star Wars and about Disney buying Fox. Why? Where are you? Where are you all now? Where are you all now? Because this is the same thing. They're beginning to own Spider-Man again. Beginning to have a stake in another studio. That's not a good thing. That's not a good thing. Now, sources say that Disney tied the royalty to the performance of the Feige-produced movies. The better the picks performed, the lower the royalty. So, it was like a subsidied royalty payment. So again, even further than... So it's not even a $30 million a year... $30 million a year royalty agreement. Definitely not now. So they would give less because they would be making more from merchandise. Do you see? Do you see how a lot of things have not really been picked up properly? Regardless, the arrangement was groundbreaking. Here was a major studio loaning out one of its top lieutenants to a rival that owned the movie rights of a character it owned in all other respects. And Feige was given carte blanche to run Spider-Man the way he wanted, even as Sony held the purse. So Sony was paying for it. Sony held the purse. Sony was paying for it. Sony was paying for it. People were saying that they were paying for it all. And both reaped in the rewards of the arrangement. Civil War, with key support from the web slinger, again, key support, grossed $1.1 billion. Homecoming, the first Feige-made movie, made $88 million, even as it featured Marvel's Iron Man and deepened the intertwining story threads of the two companies' movies. And Spider-Man was also an emotional foil and fan favourite in the two-part Avengers films, both of which grossed over $2 billion. In the case of Avengers Endgame, the pick became the top money earner of all time. Marvel took a victory lap at San Diego Comic-Con, driving fans into a frenzy by teasing new movies. So, now Sony, meanwhile, also forged ahead with renewed commitment to its Spider-Man spin-off. At a retreat, Rothman, who took over from Pascal when the latter was fired amid the Sony email hack, was convinced by 2 executives to see superhero movies as not a fad, but as genres within a larger genre. Now, the result was Venom, a critically scorned movie, which earned $850 million. A sequel is now in the works, and also in post-production is Morbius with Jared Leto. Then we got Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which, I mean, it won an Oscar. So everyone's like, Sony's never going to make anything good. What? Come on, ladies and gents. So anyway, we can continue on this, and this could turn into like a 20-minute long video, and there's not really any point. But the point is, behind all of this, is that Disney has been making a lot of money. A lot of money from Spider-Man. Even without the movies. Even without the movies. The deal between the two was absolutely fair and square. It was an arrangement that Feige himself made. So them now looking to change the goalposts on that is fine. I understand from both sides because they are both businesses first and foremost. But Sony is absolutely within their rights to say no, we're not doing that. They've won an Oscar for their Spider-Man movie, Into the Spider-Verse. Venom made $850 million. More, so close to even the first Spider-Man Homecoming movie, right? That's $30 million off. So, do they think that they could replicate stuff? Yeah, and they can. But remember, Sony owns that Tom Holland Spider-Man, so they can just keep making those movies if they want. Is it going to be the same? No, of course not. But they can probably replicate it. I don't see why they can't. And as well, there's a lot of notes to how they can set that up in universe. The post-credit scene of Spider-Man Far From Home obviously set that up, where Spider-Man isn't really known to the wider populace anymore. He goes into hiding. They can absolutely do that. So anyway, I would love to hear your thoughts on this. Like I said, I picked up a lot of flack for my first video on this, so I'd love to hear some more thoughts. But if you are new here, make sure you hit subscribe. Also, just a massive shout out to everyone that's been watching the content recently. I've been ramping up content a lot more, and you guys seem to really like it. Like, I've been getting really, really nice comments saying, loving the content, you're absolutely churning it out and stuff like that, but the quality's still there and stuff. So I thank you. Thank you so much. Really does mean the world to me. If you, off the back end of that, if you do like the channel and you want to support further, there's Patreon linked down below, as well as Teespring underneath every single video. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. I've been Mr. H. Take care.